The stories. This hospital wing is a secret trap. Larkin Pruitt learned that phrase from a guard who would not step past the double doors, not even for overtime pay. The wing sat dark on the fourth floor, and people swore it was built to catch the wrong person. He was 34 years old and worked as a biomedical equipment tech at a regional hospital near a river town. That morning, he just wanted to swap old heart monitors, label cables, and go home before his shift ran long. The renovation schedule said the wing was closed, which meant no patients and fewer interruptions for once. The charge nurse handed him a clipboard and pointed at the service elevator with a tired look. "Fourth floor, east wing, and do not get cute with those doors," she said, keeping her voice low. Larkin asked what she meant, and she shook her head like she hated the story. "They lock weird, and that place eats radios," she said, then walked away before he could ask more. Security met him at the elevator with a plastic bin of temporary badges and 2 flashlights. The guard was named Terrence Hale, late 50s, and he moved like his knees hurt every step. Terrence scanned Larkin in, then stopped at the threshold and did not cross it. "If you hear the overhead chime, you walk back out," Terrence said, watching the ceiling instead of Larkin. Larkin tried to laugh, but it came out flat and unsure. He said he was not hunting ghosts, he was swapping monitors and checking batteries. Terrence nodded like he had heard that line too many times before. "Sure," Terrence said, then pointed to the stairwell door behind them. "That is your exit. Remember it." The east wing smelled like old disinfectant and dusty drywall, with a colder air that felt deliberate. Work lights hung from cords, but only 2 of them worked, and they threw long shadows. The hallway signs still named departments that no longer existed, like Respiratory Overflow and Recovery Annex. Larkin kept moving, because standing still made the quiet feel heavier than it should. He reached the supply alcove, where the monitors were stacked in a neat row, ready for removal. Each unit had a tag with a date, and the oldest one read 1997 in faded ink. He took out his phone to snap photos for his work log, then noticed his signal was gone. That fit what Terrence said, and it still made Larkin uneasy in a way he could not name. He started on the first monitor and kept his tools close, because he did not like the echo. Metal clicks bounced down the hall, then came back softer, like someone else was repeating them. He told himself it was just the building, just the empty rooms and the tile floors. Then the overhead speaker crackled, and a single tone chirped like a call bell clearing its throat. The sound lasted 2 seconds, then the speaker went quiet again. Larkin froze with a screwdriver in his hand, listening hard for anything that followed. Nothing happened, so he exhaled and forced himself to keep working. That was when the double doors behind him swung inward and shut with a heavy final thud. He turned and walked back fast, because he did not like the timing at all. The doors had no handle on his side, just a smooth plate and a narrow seam. He pushed anyway and felt the panel give a little, then lock solid like it hit a deadbolt. He called out Terrence's name, but his voice died in the hallway like the air swallowed it. Larkin stepped back and tried the crash bar on the nearby stairwell door. The bar did not move, and the red alarm light above it did not blink. He pulled his badge and waved it at the reader, and the reader stayed dark. That was the moment the phrase made sense, and his stomach tightened with a cold rush. He walked to the closest nurse station and found an old desk with a dead computer monitor. A dusty phone sat on the counter, and its receiver cord was cut cleanly. On the wall behind it, a laminated map showed routes marked with arrows and thick lines. Someone had written in pen across the bottom, "Do not use east exit during isolation." Larkin had heard stories about isolation wings during outbreaks, but this felt older than that. He followed the map, moving slow and checking each intersection for an open stairwell. Every door he tried was locked, and the badge readers were either blank or missing. The only thing that worked was the overhead speaker, which clicked again and gave one more chirp. He stopped near room 418 because the door was cracked open a few inches. Inside was a stripped patient room with an empty bed frame and a cracked plastic chair. The window blinds were half down, and the light from outside made the room look underwater. On the floor near the wall, a thin line of dust was disturbed, like something had been dragged recently. Larkin crouched and looked closer, and he saw scuff marks leading to the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed, but the handle was intact and it opened with a soft squeal. There was nothing inside except an old vent grate and a faint smell of damp drywall. Then he noticed the grate screws were new, shiny against the rust around them. He could have ignored it, but his instincts would not let him. He grabbed the grate and pulled, and it popped free like someone wanted it removed fast. Behind it was a narrow space, not a normal duct, more like a hidden passage between walls. A second vent cover sat a few feet in, and beyond that, he saw a faint glow. Larkin took out his flashlight and aimed it into the gap, then heard a low whir of a fan. The glow came from a small work light set on the floor, and it was still warm. Someone had been there, and not a long time ago. His skin prickled and he backed away, because he did not have any business crawling into a wall. He returned to the hallway and tried to call again, but his phone still showed no service. He turned on airplane mode and off again, then tried anyway, and it failed like before. He opened his work bag and found a small handheld tester with a recording function for troubleshooting. It was not meant for this, but it was better than nothing. So he pressed record and spoke clearly. He said his name, his job, the date, and that he was locked inside the East Wing. He described the speaker tones, the door shut, and the vent gap with a warm light inside. He did it the way he filed incident reports, calm and factual, even though his hands shook. When he finished, he clipped the tester to his belt like a tiny witness. Larkin walked back to the double doors and pounded 3 times, then waited. No footsteps came, no reply, and the air felt colder near the doors, like the building was breathing. He looked up and saw a small camera dome in the corner, its lens facing down the hall. The tiny green light on it was off, which meant it might not be recording at all. He remembered the map and the note about isolation, and he started thinking like a tech again. If this wing was built for quarantine, it could have negative pressure, sealed doors, and remote locks. That could explain the weird air and the dead signals if the walls were reinforced. It could also explain why Terrence would not cross the threshold, because nobody wanted to be locked inside. He needed a control panel, something that ran the doors and the fans. He followed the hall until he found a metal door marked with faded letters, facilities only. It was locked, but the hinge side had a gap where the frame did not meet right. He slid his flashlight beam along it and saw the corner of a keypad inside. He tried the door again and felt it flex, like the latch was old and tired. He took a flat tool from his kit and worked it into the gap carefully, pushing in small increments. After a minute, the latch slipped, and the door opened with a groan that echoed too far. Inside was a cramped room full of conduit, breaker boxes, and a panel with tiny labeled switches. The panel had a sticker that read, "Isolation System, installed 1999. Below it sat a thin binder in a cracked plastic sleeve, full of maintenance notes. Larkin flipped through and saw repeated entries about door faults, speaker tests, and lock cycling. One note was underlined twice and dated 2008, and it said, "Do not enable autoseal without supervisor." He kept turning pages and found an incident entry that made him stop breathing for a second. It said a contractor got trapped after a test, and dispatch logs showed a delayed response. The note used careful language, but it ended with, "Injury reported, claim filed." Larkin had never heard about any of that, and he worked here for years. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the binder pages, then remembered there was no service. He took them anyway, because proof mattered later, even if he could not send it now. He scanned the panel and found a switch labeled Seal Enable, and it was in the on position. Next to it was a smaller switch labeled Override Release, and it was covered with a taped plastic guard. The tape looked fresh, and the guard had tiny scratches like it had been forced back recently. Larkin peeled the tape carefully and lifted the guard, then flipped the override release down. A low alarm tone sounded, not loud, but sharp, and the fans slowed like they were winding down. Down the hall, he heard the double doors clunk like bolts retracting inside the frame. He ran back to the threshold and pushed, and this time the doors moved with stiff resistance. They opened just enough for him to squeeze through, and cool normal air hit his face. He did not feel relief yet, because the hallway behind him was still dark and still wrong. He stepped out fully, and the doors shut again behind him with a softer close. Terrence was gone from the security desk, and the service elevator stood open and empty. Larkin jogged to the main corridor and finally saw a nurse, then another, then a doctor. He waved them down and tried to explain, but his voice came out too fast. A supervisor told him to sit, drink water, and wait for security, and Larkin did not argue. Within minutes, a different guard arrived, younger, and his radio worked fine in the main hall. Larkin told him everything, and he handed over the recording from the tester without hesitation. He also showed the photos on his phone, even though they were just images in a dead zone. The guard frowned and said the East Wing should be sealed only during drills, and nobody scheduled any drills. Later that afternoon, the hospital risk manager pulled Larkin into a small conference room. She was named Maris Holt, early 40s, and she spoke like someone used to bad news. She asked him to repeat the timeline, then asked if he touched anything inside the wing. Larkin said he opened a facility's door and flipped an override, because he was trapped and had no other choice. Maris stared for a long moment, then nodded slowly like she had expected that answer. She said the isolation system was supposed to be decommissioned years ago, but the project never finished. She did not explain why, and she did not have to, because her eyes gave it away. Some parts of the hospital were left behind on paper, but still alive in the walls. The next day, Larkin came back with permission to gather his tools and finish his work. This time, 2 guards went with him, and one of them carried a portable repeater for radio signal. They logged every door, every switch, and every camera dome they could find. The repeater worked until they crossed the threshold. Then the signal died again like it hit a curtain. They followed Larkin to the facilities room, and the seal enable switch was on again. Maris was not there, but a facilities supervisor was, and his face went tight when he saw it. He said nobody on his team touched that panel, and he sounded scared saying it. The younger guard took photos and called for a detective from the city, because now it was not a glitch. The detective arrived with a notebook and a calm voice, and she asked for every record they had. She requested keycard logs for the service elevator, maintenance entries, and any camera footage near the 4th floor. She used careful phrases like reportedly and consistent with, as if she knew the hospital would fight itself. Larkin watched her write, and he felt a sick pride that his recording might matter. The keycard logs showed an odd detail. One badge had accessed the service elevator at dawn that day. The badge belonged to a contract cleaner, but witness statements said the cleaner never showed up. The hospital said badges were sometimes shared, which was a problem all by itself. The detective asked who had custody of spare badges, and security went quiet. They pulled older records too, because the binder note about 2008 would not leave Larkin's mind. Dispatch logs from that year showed a call from the East Wing, then a second call, then a response delay. The narrative report used soft language about confusion and locked doors, but the pattern felt familiar. Maris admitted the injury claim existed, and she said it was settled quietly to avoid panic. Then the detective found something that connected the vent gap to the locks in a way nobody liked. A building plan from archived facilities files showed a service crawl behind room 418. It linked to a small corridor that led toward the pharmacy level, not wide enough for comfort. The plan labeled it as a contamination bypass, built so supplies could move during isolation. On paper, it made sense, but the fresh screws and warm work light meant it was being used now. They sent a small camera probe into the gap, and its final footage showed drag marks and boot prints. Near the far end, the camera caught a plastic tote wedged behind a pipe, still sealed. Inside the tote were dozens of pre-packed syringe kits, the kind tracked tightly by the pharmacy. That discovery changed the tone of the whole investigation, because now there was a motive. Someone was using the old bypass to steal controlled supplies without crossing monitored hallways. The lock trap was not superstition. It was a tool, and it kept witnesses out of the way. If a tech got stuck inside, the thief could work the bypass with less risk of being seen. The twist came when they matched the Dawn badge swipe to a second system log. The isolation panel recorded every time the seal enable switch changed position. It showed the switch was turned on 2 minutes after the badge swipe, then turned off later. That meant the person who entered wanted the wing sealed, and they knew exactly where the panel was. They checked cameras outside the threshold because those still worked, and one angle finally gave a face. The figure wore scrubs under a jacket and kept their head down, but the gait was distinct. A nurse manager recognized the walk and the shoes, and she said it matched a long-time supply runner. The hospital could not accuse anyone publicly, but the detective did not need public accusations. A week later, the detective returned with a warrant and took a specific employee into custody off-site. The public statement said an internal theft ring was under investigation, and details were limited. Maris sent a short email to staff saying the East Wing was sealed permanently pending safety upgrades. No one wrote the words "secret trap" in that email, but everybody understood the message anyway. Larkin finished replacing the monitors in a different unit, and he refused any job that required the East Wing. He kept the tester recording backed up at home because he did not trust systems that went dark. Sometimes he still thought about that chirp from the overhead speaker, small and polite and wrong. It sounded like a warning or a signal, and he believed it had saved him by making him move. Months later, after the panel was removed and the bypass was filled, Terrence finally told Larkin one more thing. He said the wing was built to protect the rest of the hospital, and it did when used right. He said the danger came when someone decided protection could also be a cage. Larkin nodded and looked at the plain wall where the double doors used to be and felt quiet relief. The stories. This photo wasn't meant for you. The photo showed a man standing in a motel hallway holding a keycard like he was waiting for someone. Dispatch logs later showed the motel never called for help that night, even though someone clearly should have. In late October of 2016, Lyle Harkness was 34 and worked as a contract insurance adjuster. He spent most weeks on the road, taking storm claims and documenting damage with a tidy little camera. That Monday, he drove into a worn coastal town in the Pacific Northwest, chasing a stack of roof inspections. He wanted a shower, a hot meal, and 8 hours of sleep before a long day of ladders. The Bayshore Motor Lodge was cheap, quiet, and close to the highway, so he took it. The clerk handed him a key card and a receipt, then pointed toward the stairs without much eye contact. Lyle carried his bag up one flight and found his room near the ice machine at the far end. He noticed a security camera in the corner, but it looked old and a little crooked. Inside, the room smelled like bleach and lemon cleaner, which felt oddly reassuring for the price. He tossed his bag onto the bed and checked his phone, hoping for messages from the field office. Instead of a text, an image loaded on his screen, like someone had sent it through a group thread. It was a photo, grainy and slightly tilted, showing a motel hallway under buzzing lights. A man stood near a door, facing the camera, holding a keycard between two fingers. The timestamp in the corner read 11:52, which made no sense because it was only 9. The message line above the photo was blank, and there was no sender name at all. Lyle stared, then checked his signal and refreshed his inbox, thinking it was a glitch. The photo stayed, and his phone showed it came in as a multimedia message. He tried to open details, but the sender field looked like a string of zeros. He felt that prickle of annoyance, the kind he got from spam calls and fake bank alerts. He deleted the message, then set the phone down and turned on the bathroom light. 2 minutes later, the same photo arrived again, and his phone chimed like it was proud of itself. This time, the message line had 4 words, and they made his stomach tighten fast. It said, "This photo wasn't meant for you." Lyle glanced at the door, then at the hallway through the peephole, but nothing moved outside. He called the front desk, trying to keep his voice calm and normal. A tired woman answered and asked for his room number, like she was reading a script. He asked if they had a group text system or guest messaging, and she said no. He told her someone sent him a hallway photo that looked like the motel, and she went quiet. After a pause, she said, "Probably a wrong number. Just ignore it." Then ended the call quickly. Lyle did not like how fast she shut it down, so he saved the photo to his camera roll. He zoomed in on the door number behind the man, and the pixels fought him the whole way. Still, he could make out the shape of the numbers, and it looked like 128. His room was 115, and 128 would be down the hall and around the corner. He checked the timestamp again, then looked at the clock on the nightstand to ground himself. He went back to the peephole and watched for a full minute, breathing slow and steady. The corridor was empty, but the light flicker made it feel like a bad video loop. He told himself it was a wrong number, then tried to focus on something normal. He opened his laptop, pulled up his claim notes, and started writing a plan for the morning. That helped, until his phone vibrated again on the bedspread like a trapped insect. The new message was not a photo. It was a short audio file with no title. Lyle hesitated, then pressed play with the volume low, keeping one eye on the door. A man's voice came through, whispering fast, like he was hiding in a closet. Door 128. Now, the voice said. Bring the card, do not knock. Then there was a click, and the file ended like someone had yanked the battery out. Lyle sat very still, letting the silence settle, trying to decide if this was a prank. He thought about calling the police, then pictured the dispatcher asking what crime happened. He had a weird photo and a creepy whisper, which sounded thin even to his own ears. Still, his job trained him to document first, then act with a clear record. He saved the audio, took screenshots of the message thread, and wrote the time in his notes. A knock hit his door, sharp and short, and it made his skin jump. He moved to the peephole again, his heart thumping hard against his ribs. A man stood in the hall, not the same man from the photo, but close in build. This one wore a faded hoodie and held his hand near the lock, like he expected it to open. He leaned in and said, "You got the picture, right?" In a low, impatient voice. Lyle did not answer, and he did not move the chain, and he kept breathing through his nose. The man tried the handle once, then stepped back and stared at the door like it betrayed him. He lifted his phone, typed something, and waited, as if he expected a reply from the walls. After 10 seconds, he walked away toward the stairs, moving fast but not running. Lyle listened until the footsteps faded, then called the front desk again with shaking fingers. This time, a different clerk answered, a man with a flat voice that sounded half asleep. Lyle said someone just tried his door and asked if there was security on site. The clerk asked if anything was stolen, and when Lyle said no, the clerk sounded bored. He told Lyle to lock the deadbolt and call in the morning if it happened again. Then he added, sometimes locals mess around, and ended the call without taking a name. Lyle decided he was not staying another night, but he also did not want to walk outside alone. He put on his jacket, kept his phone recording audio in his pocket, and stepped into the hall. The corridor smelled like damp carpet and stale smoke, and the buzzing light felt louder now. He walked toward the stairs, passing door 128, and he slowed without meaning to. The door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to show a dark slice inside. Lyle stopped, listening, and he heard a faint shuffling sound, like someone moving a chair. He looked for a do not disturb sign, but there was none, and the hallway stayed empty. He did not want to be a hero, but he also could not shake the whisper from the audio. He pushed the door gently with 2 fingers, and it swung inward with a soft creak. The room was dark, but the bathroom light was on, casting a pale rectangle onto the carpet. A man lay on the floor near the bed, face down, one arm bent under his chest. There was no blood, no obvious wounds, just a stillness that looked wrong in the cheap light. Lyle's throat tightened, and he stepped back into the hall as if the room was radioactive. He called 911, and his voice cracked when he gave the motel name and room number. He stayed outside the open doorway, watching, waiting for the sound of breathing that never came. Police arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance that did not use sirens in the last block. Officers moved Lyle away and asked him to repeat what happened, and he did it carefully. He told them about the photo, the text, the whisper audio, and the man who tried his door. A detective asked to see the messages, and Lyle handed over his phone with trembling hands. The detective's face changed slightly when he saw the photo, like he recognized the setting. The motel hallway was taped off, and guests were asked to stay in their rooms. Lyle sat in a plastic chair near the lobby, giving a written statement with a dull pencil. He watched the clerk avoid looking at him, and he noticed her hands shaking when she poured coffee. Around 1 in the morning, a detective named Maris Grieve asked Lyle to come outside to talk. She was blunt, but not cruel, and she asked why he saved the photo instead of deleting it. Lyle told her his work made him keep records, and he thought it might be a scam. Grieve nodded and asked if he recognized the man in the photo, and Lyle said no. She asked if Lyle had any enemies, any business disputes, any reason someone would target him. Lyle almost laughed, because his life was boring and mostly spreadsheets, receipts, and long drives. Grieve wrote something down, then said the man in room 128 was not a guest. The dead man's wallet had no cash and no cards, just a library card and a folded receipt. The receipt was from a print shop in town, dated 2 days earlier, and it listed photocopies. Grieve said the room was rented under a fake name, paid in cash, and checked in by a woman. That woman left before dark, according to a bartender across the street who saw her smoking outside. Grev kept saying reportedly and so far, like she was careful not to build a story too early. Lyle asked about the guy who tried his door, and Grieve said the motel cameras were broken. Lyle did not believe that. Not fully, because he saw the camera in the hallway corner. He asked if the camera had been checked, and Grave gave a tired half smile. She said the camera housing was real, but the line was cut inside the wall months earlier. Then she asked again about the messages, and Lyle felt the question underneath the question. Back in his room, escorted by an officer, Lyle copied the files to his laptop as a backup. He listened to the whisper audio again through headphones, trying to catch background sounds. Under the words, there was a tiny rhythm, like a washer thumping or a vending machine hum. He played it beside the open window, and the hum lined up with the ice machine outside. It meant the whisper came from this floor, close enough to hear that steady mechanical beat. He opened the photo in editing software and boosted contrast, careful not to change the original file. At the bottom edge, a reflection showed in the glossy paint of a door across the hall. It was faint, but it looked like a phone held up by someone standing low and close. The angle suggested the photo was taken from near the carpet, like someone crouched or hid. Lyle wrote that down, then stopped, realizing he was acting like a detective on no sleep. The next morning, Grieve met him in the lobby and asked for that backup copy. She said digital evidence could vanish, and she did not want to rely on one device. Lyle handed over a flash drive, and she thanked him without warmth, just professional focus. Then she asked a new question, and it landed heavy in the quiet lobby. She asked if Lyle knew what a war-driving rig was, and Lyle said he had heard of it. Greve explained it in plain language, like she had done it before with nervous civilians. Someone nearby had used a laptop or hotspot to spoof a phone number and push messages. It made the sender look like nothing, and it made the target look random. Lyle asked why they would target him, and Grieve said that part was still unclear. Then she slid a printed photo across the counter, and it was the same hallway shot. On the back of the print, someone had written 2 letters and a time, all in blocky ink. It read, LH 1150. And Grieve watched Lyle's face as he read it. Lyle felt his mouth go dry, because those were his initials, and the time was close to the photo. He told Grieve he had never been in that hallway at that time, and she believed him. What scared him was that someone else believed he would be, like they had planned it. Grave asked about his work schedule, and Lyle told her his last inspection ended at 5. He stopped for dinner at a diner on the highway, paid with a card, and arrived at 8:30. Grieve said they would pull the diner footage, and she called it an external check. She also asked for his claim file because it showed his travel route and timestamps. Lyle agreed, because the alternative was feeling like a suspect in someone else's mess. Over the next 2 days, Grev kept him in the loop, which surprised him. The diner had footage that matched his story, and his card record backed the timeline. The print shop receipt from the dead man led to a clerk who remembered odd requests. The clerk said a woman asked for copies of security stills from a motel, paid cash, and rushed out. Grieve tracked the woman through a bus station camera, but her face stayed hidden under a cap. Then Grieve called Lyle with a detail that made the whole thing tilt sideways. The dead man was identified, not by family, but by a probation officer from another county. He had violated terms months earlier and had been missing from scheduled check-ins. In his file, there was a note about scams involving insurance adjusters after storms. The note said he and a partner used fake claims, then targeted adjusters who denied payouts. They pressured them, sometimes threatened them, and sometimes tried to steal laptops and cameras. Lyle felt cold hearing that, because his laptop held client data and claim documents. Grev said it was not proof, but it was a working theory that fit the pieces. The man who tried Lyle's door may have expected a different guest, one tied to that scam network. The messages were likely meant to lure someone to room 128, not to warn them away. The line, "This photo wasn't meant for you," started sounding less like a threat and more like panic. Greve asked Lyle to think back, and he finally remembered a small thing from check-in. The first clerk asked for his name, then repeated it softly like she was confirming something. She also looked at a paper list beside her keyboard, then slid the keycard over too fast. At the time, it seemed like bad customer service, but now it sounded like nerves. Lyle told Grieve, and Grieve asked him to describe the list. down to the color of the paper. That night, Grieve returned to the motel with a warrant for the office back room. She later told Lyle they found a clipboard with handwritten room assignments and guest names. Some names had circles, some had arrows, and one room number was scratched out hard. Room 115 had been written first, then crossed out, then rewritten beside Lyle's name. The room that should have been his, according to the original assignment, was 128. Greve said the motel manager admitted to taking cash from locals to leave certain rooms open. The manager claimed it was for drug deals, but Grave did not buy the whole story. The manager also admitted someone demanded access to the guest list that afternoon. The demand came with a threat, and the manager panicked and tried to swap a room quietly. It was a clumsy attempt to protect a guest, and it almost made the wrong guest die. The twist hit Lyle in a slow wave, like his brain needed time to accept it. The photo was not meant for him because he was not meant to be in that room. Someone expected an adjuster named Lyle Harkness to be in 128 at 11:50. Someone else, maybe the clerk, tried to reroute him to 115 without admitting why. The person sending the photo realized the swap too late, and the warning was all they could do. Greb said the man in the hoodie was likely the partner, arriving to finish a theft or a threat. He tried Lyle's door because he believed Lyle still had the original room. When Lyle did not answer, the partner went to 128 and found a problem already happened. Grave did not say exactly what evidence supported that, but she mentioned shoe prints and a glove. She also mentioned a dropped burner phone found near the stairs, still warm when police arrived. A week later, Lyle drove home with a new habit of checking locks twice. He kept replaying the moment he saw the photo and how close the plan came to working. He did not know if the clerk saved him on purpose or if she was just scared and guessing. Grieve later told him the clerk quit and left town, and nobody could find her easily. The case did not end with a clean confession, just a string of charges that fit the evidence. Lyle returned to his normal work, but he stopped staying at places that felt too cheap. He also started printing his own records because he learned how fast digital proof can get messy. Sometimes he opened the saved image and looked at the man holding the keycard in the hall. The man's face was tired and blank, like he already knew how the night would go. Lyle never learned who took the photo, but he understood the message better with time. It was not a spooky warning from nowhere, and it was not some curse tied to a motel. It was a human mistake, a rushed fix, and a plan that did not care who got hurt. The photo was meant to land on one person's screen at one time to pull them into a room. It landed on the wrong screen, and the wrong person lived because of that simple error. In the end, the scariest part was how ordinary the whole setup looked in bad lighting. The stories. You can't outrun winter on that mountain road. The dispatcher log said the call lasted 47 seconds, and then the line went dead without a word. By dawn, a county plow driver found the truck door open, the engine warm, and nobody in the seat. On a Monday in late January, Lark Tolland woke before sunrise in a rental cabin above a ski town. He was 36, and he worked as a claims field investigator for a regional insurance company. His job was simple: on paper, verify damage, take photos, and write reports that could survive court. That morning, he planned to inspect a fender bender and be back in town before the next storm. The road down the mountain was narrow and shaded, with old pines that kept the snow from melting. A blinking sign near the first switchback warned about whiteouts and sudden closures in winter weather. Lark had seen signs like that everywhere, but this one looked freshly bent, like someone hit it hard. He slowed anyway, because the sky had that pale look that meant snow could start at any moment. The claim file on his passenger seat was thin, almost too thin to justify the drive. A delivery van had allegedly slid into a guardrail 2 nights earlier, then limped to a turnout. The driver reported minor injuries and a dented quarter panel, then asked for a quick settlement. The location was vague, described only as mile marker 27, near a scenic overlook. He reached the overlook and found something that did not match a minor accident report. The guardrail was scraped clean of paint, and the snowbank behind it was packed with broken glass. A few feet away, a second set of tire tracks cut off the shoulder and dipped into the trees. Those tracks had been dusted over, but the grooves still showed through like bruises under skin. Lark parked, stepped out, and felt the cold clamp on his lungs in a way that stole patience. He took wide shots first, then moved closer, keeping his boots on the packed snow for traction. The glass pieces were green and thick, more like an older truck window than a modern van pane. He also saw a torn strip of reflective tape, the kind that came on utility trucks. He used a small ruler for scale and photographed everything, then recorded a quick voice memo. The timestamp on his phone read 9:14, and he noted the wind was picking up fast. He tried calling the number on the claim, but it went straight to voicemail without ringing. The mailbox greeting was generic, and it ended with a click that sounded oddly clipped. Back in the cab, he opened the claim photos the driver had submitted. They showed a clean dent, no shattered window, and no guardrail scrape that deep. The van in the pictures also had no reflective tape, and its plate was never visible. Lark felt the small itch of a file that was built to be paid quickly. He drove a short loop to find the mile marker again because the road numbers rarely lined up. Near a bend, he spotted a maintenance gate and a service road leading into the trees. A fresh powder layer covered it, but a faint pair of tracks ran straight through the snow. They looked like a heavier vehicle, wide stance and deep tread pattern. He turned onto the service road slowly, keeping his tires in the grooves to avoid getting stuck. The trees closed in, and the temperature dropped like he crossed an invisible line. After a quarter mile, he found a shallow ditch and a broken branch sprayed with dried mud. That mud was dark and gritty, like it came from a lower elevation where the ground was exposed. A few yards beyond the ditch, something metallic flashed under the snow. Lark knelt and brushed it clear with his glove, then froze when he saw what it was. It was a small radio microphone, the kind clipped to a uniform with a torn cord end. The push button was cracked, and the backplate had a number etched into it. He did not pocket it, because he had learned what that could look like later. He photographed it from every angle, then used a clean bag from his kit to cover it. He set a bright survey flag beside it so he could return with someone official. Then he walked back to the truck, feeling the snow start to sting his cheeks. At the overlook again, a state trooper cruiser sat angled across the turnout. The trooper was a stocky man with tired eyes, and his name tag read Kincaid. He looked at Lark's company badge and asked why he was off the main road. Lark explained the claim, then mentioned the reflective tape and the radio microphone. Kincaid's face changed at the word microphone, like a door quietly closing. He asked Lark to wait, then spoke into his own radio with careful, clipped phrases. When he returned, he told Lark the area was restricted due to a missing person report. He did not give details, but his jaw tightened when the wind gusted. Lark offered to show his photos, and Kincaid hesitated before nodding once. Inside the cruiser, Lark scrolled through the images, pointing out the glass and tape. Kincaid stared at the green glass, then at the guardrail scrape, and swallowed hard. He asked if Lark had found anything else, and Lark mentioned the service road tracks. Kincaid told him to stay put, then drove off toward the service gate without lights. Lark watched the cruiser disappear, and the quiet that followed felt deliberate. A few minutes later, Lark's phone buzzed with an unknown number calling him again. He answered, and a man's voice said, "Turn around and go back to town." The voice was calm, almost bored, and it did not sound like law enforcement. Lark asked who it was, and the line went dead with the same clipped click. He called back, but the number did not connect, like it was never real. He sat still, hands on the wheel, listening to the wind push snow across the glass. He could have left, and nobody would blame him for staying in his lane. Instead, he opened the claim file again, looking for anything he had missed. The driver name was written as Holden Rusk, but the signature was a rough block scrawl. The listed employer was a courier firm, yet the policyholder was a private individual. He checked the vehicle identification number recorded in the report. It was missing a digit, and the typed font looked copied from another document. Lark felt a cold certainty settle in, because small mistakes like that were never accidents. Someone had wanted the file to move fast, and they had not expected a field visit. Snow began to fall in thicker flakes, and the sky flattened into a dull white ceiling. Lark decided to head to the sheriff's substation in town because the trooper had left him alone. On the way down, the road narrowed further, and the wind started to shove the truck sideways. He kept both hands tight, and he drove slow enough that impatience could not tempt him. Halfway down, he saw a pair of headlights in his mirror, closing the distance too quickly. A dark pickup rode his bumper, then flashed high beams twice like an impatient warning. Lark pulled to the right where he could, but the pickup did not pass. It stayed behind him, keeping the same tight gap like it was hurting him. At a wide bend, the pickup finally swung around, spraying slush onto his windshield. As it passed, Lark caught a glimpse of a ladder rack and a stripe of reflective tape. The tape was torn, with a jagged edge that matched the piece he photographed at the overlook. The pickup did not speed away. It slowed ahead, forcing Lark to brake. Lark's pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept the wheel straight and his eyes forward. He reached for his phone and started recording audio, keeping it low by his thigh. The pickup drifted toward the center line, blocking him from passing safely. Then its brake lights flared, and the truck came to a near stop in the snow. Lark honked once, and the sound died in the storm like it was swallowed. A door opened on the pickup, and a figure stepped out wearing a dark coat and a hood. The figure raised a hand, not waving, more like signaling him to stay where he was. Lark shifted into reverse slowly, because panic made bad decisions feel like good ones. The pickup's figure walked toward him, boots crunching, head lowered against the wind. Lark kept backing, inches at a time, watching the road edge in his side mirror. His tires started to slip on the packed snow, and the engine strained. He stopped reversing, because another foot would put him into the ditch. The figure reached his driver door and tapped the window with 2 knuckles. Lark did not roll it down, and he did not unlock the door. He held up his badge through the glass and said, "I'm going to the sheriff right now." The figure leaned close, and Lark saw a beard and a pale scar under one eye. The man said, "You don't want to be out here when the road closes." His voice was the same calm voice from the phone, and it carried like he was unbothered. Lark said, "Move your truck, or I'm calling this in as a threat." The man smiled once, and it looked practiced. Then he stepped back. He walked to the pickup and climbed in, and the truck rolled forward again. Lark followed at a safer distance, keeping the audio recording running. The pickup took the next turnout suddenly, then vanished into the trees. Lark did not follow, because the lesson was clear. Someone knew exactly where he was. In town, the sheriff's substation was warm and smelled like coffee and wet wool. A deputy with a tired face took his statement, then asked him to wait in the lobby. After 10 minutes, Sheriff Rel Marston came out, coat still dusted with snow. He was in his late 50s, and his eyes looked like they had missed too much sleep. Marston introduced himself and listened without interrupting, hands folded behind his back. Lark showed the photos, the claim file, and the audio clip of the bearded man's warning. Marston nodded slowly, then asked if Lark had shared the microphone find with anyone else. Lark said he only told Trooper Kincaid, and Marston's mouth tightened at the name. Marston stepped into an office and made 2 calls, speaking low and careful. When he returned, he said a plow operator had reported an abandoned utility truck up the mountain. The operator said the door was open, the engine was warm, and a radio mic was missing. That matched Lark's find, and it matched the green glass scattered near the guardrail. Marston said the missing person was a county road technician, last seen checking a sensor array. Lark asked why a road technician would be connected to an insurance claim. Marston replied that it might be a distraction, or it might be a way to move a vehicle quietly. He said dispatch had received a strange call the previous night from a payphone near the mountain lodge. The caller reported a crash location, then hung up before answering any follow-up questions. The report was logged, but the storm had delayed a response until morning. Marston asked Lark to forward the claim documents, and Lark did it from his email app. Then Marston asked for the unknown number that called him, and Lark gave it. A deputy ran it through their system, and it returned as an unassigned routing number. Marston said that could happen with certain internet calling tools, and his face stayed flat. By afternoon, the storm thickened, and the mountain road closed behind the plows. Lark stayed in town, because leaving would mean returning to the same road in worse weather. Marston offered him a spare desk, and Lark spent hours comparing times and photos. He zoomed in on the claim images, looking for reflections, signage, and anything that anchored location. In one picture, he noticed a faint sign edge behind the van, showing a shape of a pine logo. That logo matched the ski area, not the overlook, and the snowbanks were shaped differently. The van photos had been taken in a plowed lot, not on a mountain shoulder. It meant the crash never happened where the claim said it did. Lark pointed it out, and Marston asked his deputy to pull traffic camera footage from the town entrance. The footage was grainy, but it showed a dark pickup with a ladder rack entering town 2 nights earlier. It also showed a utility truck following behind, then turning toward the mountain road after midnight. 20 minutes later, the same pickup came back alone, moving fast and wobbling like it was overloaded. Marston stared at the screen and said, "That utility truck never came back down." The next day, weather cleared just enough for a search team to go up with snowmobiles. Lark went along as a civilian witness, staying behind the deputies and marked vehicles. Near the service gate, they found the ditch and the broken branch, just like Lark described. They also found drag marks leading downhill, as if something heavy had been pulled on a tarp. The marks ended near a culvert where the snow hit a dark opening under the road. A deputy shined a light inside, and the beam caught a flash of reflective tape. They crawled in carefully and found the missing county utility truck wedged at an angle. The windshield was shattered, and the passenger window was gone, matching the green glass outside. There was no body in the cab, but there was a flashlight, a notebook, and a torn jacket sleeve. The notebook was damp but readable, and it looked like field notes. It listed sensor readings and timestamps, and then a final line that made Marston go quiet. The last entry said, "Saw an unmarked truck by the sensor box, driver wearing a fake badge." It ended with the words, "Call dispatch now," and then the ink smeared like the pen slipped. Marston said the technician had likely interrupted a theft because those sensor boxes used copper wiring. Copper theft was common, and crews sometimes got targeted because they worked alone at odd hours. But the fake badge detail changed things because it suggested planning, not opportunistic stealing. Lark asked about Trooper Kincaid, and Marston hesitated before answering. Marston said Kincaid was on administrative leave pending an internal review. He said a witness had reported seeing a cruiser near the service road around the time of the crash. That witness also described the trooper speaking with a bearded man by a pickup with a ladder rack. Marston did not accuse anyone outright, but the tightness in his voice carried the implication. Back at the substation, Marston received a call from state investigators. They had traced the fake claim documents to a printer at a small office rental in a nearby city. The office had been rented under a false name, paid in cash, and emptied the day after the storm. But a trash bin behind the building held a crumpled page with a copied policy template. On that page was a scribbled note that matched the etched number on the radio microphone. The etched number turned out to be an inventory tag from the county road department. It meant someone had handled the microphone long enough to scratch it, then dropped it in the snow. Lark realized the microphone was not lost during the crash. It was removed on purpose. The person who called him had tried to push him off the mountain before he connected the pieces. The winter storm was not just weather, it was cover, and it arrived right on schedule. 2 weeks later, the technician was found alive in a remote hunting shed below the tree line. Reportedly, he had a concussion and frostbite, and he had been too confused to find the road. Searchers found him after a dog caught his scent near the creek, then led handlers uphill. He told investigators he remembered voices, a flashlight in his face, and someone saying, "No witnesses." He also remembered a radio crackle, then silence, as if the battery had been pulled. The case did not wrap neatly, and Lark never claimed it did. There were reports of arrests tied to theft rings, and there were rumors about internal misconduct. What stayed solid were the logs, the camera clips, and the small mismatches that started it all. A bent warning sign, glass the wrong color, and reflective tape that did not belong on a van. When Lark finally drove home, the mountain road was open and sunny, but he still gripped the wheel hard. He stopped once at the overlook and looked at the guardrail, now patched and repainted. It looked normal again, which was the point of winter. It erased the edges fast. But in his report, the photos stayed sharp, and the timestamps stayed honest. The stories. The most troubling cases of missing hikers. The case file was thin, but the silence around it was heavy. It started with a trail register page that ended mid-sentence, and nobody could explain why. In early October of 2017, Lyle Maris was 38 and worked as a county records clerk. He handled archived reports, public requests, and the boring paperwork that kept a small sheriff office afloat. That morning, he planned to scan old search logs, then get home before the first hard rain. He did not plan to reopen a missing hikers case that everyone acted allergic to. The request came in a plain envelope with no return address and a sticky note inside. The note asked for copies of 3 files, all tied to the same state forest trail system. It also included a date range, and it ended with one sentence that felt like a dare. Do not call it an accident until you read the audio. Lyle was used to weird mail, but this one carried details only staff should know. He pulled the files from the back room, and he noticed something immediately. Each folder had the same handwriting on the spine and a strip of tape over the label. The tape looked old, and it had been trimmed clean, like someone wanted it to look official. The first file was from late summer of 2011, involving 2-day hikers. They parked at a trailhead near a reservoir and never returned before dark. Search teams found their car, their lunches, and their jackets folded on the back seat. The report said there was no sign of foul play, but it also said the keys were missing. The second file was from 2013, involving a couple and their dog. Witness statements placed them on the main trail at noon, heading toward a fire lookout. The dog was found the next day, wet and shaking, with a leash still attached. The couple was never found, and the report ended with a single line about bad weather. The third file was newer, from late spring of 2015, involving a lone hiker. Her friends said she was careful, and she always texted when she hit a landmark. Her phone last pinged near an old service road, then went quiet like it had been turned off. Searchers found her pack under a downed log, and it was neatly zipped and dry. Lyle did not like the pattern, but he could not say why yet. None of the cases were famous, and they were not tied to any public scandal. Still, someone had blocked the labels, and someone wanted the audio. Lyle checked the file inventory, and he saw a line item called Field Recording Station Copy. The sheriff office kept old audio in a small evidence room, but access was logged. Lyle asked the evidence tech, a man named Bracken Rudd, 46, civilian specialist. Bracken said the tapes were real, and he looked annoyed that Lyle even knew about them. He said the recordings came from a volunteer search leader who carried a handheld radio. Then he added that the recordings were mostly wind and there was nothing helpful. Lyle asked if he could listen anyway, because the request specifically mentioned audio. Bracken shrugged, then signed the checkout in a slow and careful way. He handed Lyle a small digital file player with a single folder loaded onto it. The folder name matched the trail system, and it held 3 audio clips. Lyle listened at his desk with cheap headphones, trying to keep his face neutral. The first clip started with radio chatter, then a pause, then a clipped female voice. Copy, Team 2 is at marker 7. Hearing something ahead? Might be hikers. Then there was a low sound under the static, like a steady tone that wavered. The voice returned, quieter now, and it did not sound like she was joking. Someone is whistling. It is close, but I do not see anybody on the trail. A second voice replied from base, asking if she meant a bird call. She said no, and then the clip ended with a sharp click. The second clip was longer and worse because it included more than one witness. A man spoke first, and he was breathing hard, like he had been running uphill. Base, this is Ridge Team. We found the dog, no people. The dog keeps pulling north. Base asked for location, and he gave a marker number and a creek crossing. Then the same low tone appeared again, faint but constant, riding under every word. The man said, "Do you hear that? Tell me you hear that." Base replied, "Negative. Copy your traffic. What is the sound on your end?" The man did not answer right away, and when he did, his voice had changed. "It is like a phone ringing, but not right. It is coming from the trees." Another voice joined in, a woman, and she sounded angry and scared at the same time. "Stop calling back. Whoever is doing it is moving. It keeps pacing us." Base told them to regroup, and the clip ended with heavy footsteps and a curse. The third clip was from the 2015 case, and it started calm. A volunteer said they had found the pack, and it looked staged, not dropped. Base asked what he meant, and he said the pack was clean and centered on the log. Then the tone appeared again, louder this time, and it pulsed like a slow alarm. The volunteer lowered his voice, like he was afraid the radio itself could betray him. "Someone is answering our calls. Not on the repeater. It is local, like line of sight." Base asked who was answering, and the volunteer said he could not see them. He added one detail that made Lyle pause with his hand on the volume knob. It is using her voice. It is using her exact voice. Base demanded he repeat, and the volunteer said, "It is her. It is the missing hiker." Then a sound cut through the tone, a short laugh, and it was too clean to be wind. The clip ended right after, as if somebody had hit stop on purpose. Lyle sat back, and he felt his throat tighten in a way he could not explain. He had heard enough dispatch audio to know when something was off. Voices on radios can warp, but this sounded like a deliberate imitation. He checked the player, and he saw a note field attached to the third clip. The note was timestamped, and it said, "Do not release. Causes copycat behavior." Lyle stared at it, because it did not sound like normal evidence language. He opened the case file again and looked for the author of the note. It was signed by a lieutenant who retired years ago, and who had a reputation for control. Lyle did what records clerks do when they get nervous. He went to the paper trail, because paper does not care about feelings. He pulled dispatch logs for the search days, and he compared timestamps to the clips. The audio did not match the official logs, not perfectly, not even close. In the 2011 case, the log showed no mention of whistling. In the 2013 case, the log listed routine updates and nothing unusual. In the 2015 case, the log said the pack was found, then it jumped ahead. The gap was 47 minutes, and the log had a generic entry that did not explain it. Lyle printed the pages, then walked them to the deputy captain, who oversaw records. The captain was named Odessa Train, 52, patrol supervisor, and she had seen everything. She read the pages, then listened to the clips with a stiff jaw. When she finished, she did not say it was fake, and she did not say it was real. She asked where Lyle got the player, and he said from evidence checkout. She asked who else had access, and he named Bracken and a few supervisors. Odessa told Lyle to stop working the case, but her tone was not angry. It sounded like caution, the kind that comes from knowing a door should stay shut. Lyle nodded, but he could not let it go after hearing the imitation claim. He asked Odessa one direct question, and he kept his voice low. "Did anybody ever find the source of that tone?" Odessa held his eyes for a moment, then said, "They said it was interference." That answer was not satisfying, because interference does not track across years like a fingerprint. Lyle went home with the envelope still on his desk, and he barely tasted dinner. That night, he searched old newspaper microfilm, because the internet did not hold local history. He found brief articles about each case, but they all shared one strange detail. Each article mentioned a ranger station hotline set up for tips. The number was printed, then removed in later editions, like it had been a mistake. Lyle checked the old phone list, and he found the number was still active. It rang to a recorded message that said the station was closed for the season. The next morning, Lyle arrived early and asked Bracken about the hotline number. Bracken stiffened, then said that number belonged to a radio patch line, not a public phone. He said it was used during searches to bridge handheld radios to dispatch when coverage failed. Lyle asked why a patch line had a public recording, and Bracken said he did not know. Lyle did not press harder, because Bracken looked like he wanted to end the conversation. Instead, Lyle called the number from his desk phone, then held his recorder near the speaker. The message played, and it sounded normal at first, like any bored announcement voice. Then, under the words, the low tone crept in. Faint, but present, like a shadow. Lyle stopped the recording, then replayed it, and the tone was still there. He called again, and the tone shifted slightly, like it was responding to the call. He did it a third time, and he heard a tiny click between phrases. It was the same click that ended the first clip from 2011. Lyle brought his recording to Odessa, and this time she did not tell him to stop. She told him to sit down, then she locked her office door. Odessa said there was something older than the three cases, and it was why people avoided them. She said a decade earlier, a volunteer had abused the patch system to prank search teams. According to witness statements, the volunteer used the patch to mimic lost hikers on radio. He did it to keep morale up and to test response time, and it went too far. A young deputy confronted him in the woods, and a fight happened near a ravine. The volunteer fell, and the deputy claimed it was an accident, and the file vanished. Odessa said the patch line was never fully decommissioned after that. It stayed, because it was useful. and because nobody wanted to admit the history. She said some supervisors treated it like a ghost story, and others treated it like leverage. When new hikers went missing, the old prank story came back, like a stain that would not wash. Lyle asked if that explained the imitation voice in the 2015 audio. Odessa said it could, but only if somebody still had access and still wanted control. She said the most troubling part was not the tone or the voice. It was the way the official logs had been cleaned, as if someone edited reality after the fact. Together, they pulled the maintenance records for the patch system. They found work orders signed by the retired lieutenant years after his supposed retirement. The signatures matched his style, and the dates aligned with the 3 search periods. It looked like he kept his hands on the system, even after he stopped wearing a badge. Odessa contacted the county IT contractor who handled old radio gear, a man named Kellen Swope, 44. Kellen agreed to inspect the patch cabinet at the ranger station site. He found a hidden add-on board that allowed call forwarding and voice playback. It was not standard equipment, and it was installed cleanly, like someone knew what they were doing. Kellen also found a small memory card taped inside the cabinet. The card contained voice samples labeled with dates and trail marker numbers. Some samples were harmless, like volunteers calling in their positions. Others were short clips of hikers on the day they vanished, taken from tip-line voicemails. That was the payoff nobody wanted, because it tied the missing hikers to a human choice. Someone had been collecting their voices, then using those voices during searches. It did not prove the same person caused the disappearances, and Odessa was careful about that. But it proved someone exploited the chaos, and someone wanted the searches to move a certain way. In one file, a witness had reported hearing a phone ring in the trees near a creek. The search team went toward the sound, and they left the main trail for almost an hour. In another file, a volunteer heard a voice call her name from a ravine, and she went alone. She later told investigators she felt embarrassed because it sounded like her missing friend. Those moments were the cracks, and someone had been pushing on them. Odessa opened an internal investigation, and the county prosecutor reviewed what they could prove. The retired lieutenant was questioned, and he denied installing anything. He said the card was planted, and he said the clips were taken out of context. No public arrest followed, at least not in a way the town could point to and feel satisfied. But the ranger station patch line was shut down, and the hotline number went dead. New policy required sealed logs and outside audits during every future search. The 3 cases remained unsolved because the woods do not offer clean answers. Still, the way the searches unfolded now had a more believable explanation. Lyle kept thinking about the envelope and the sticky note, and who sent it. He asked Odessa if she knew, and she said she had a strong guess. She believed it was a former volunteer, someone who felt guilty and wanted the truth on record. That person did not want credit and did not want to be seen as a snitch in a small county. Weeks later, Lyle returned the files to storage and retaped the labels properly. He did not do it to hide them, he did it to mark them as normal evidence again. Some cases become legends, and legends make people careless in the wrong ways. These cases were troubling because they showed how easy it is to steer a search. When hikers vanish, the first enemy is time, and the second enemy is confusion. A single false sound can move trained people off a trail and into wasted hours. The woods can be cruel on their own, but people can make them worse. That is why the most troubling cases are not always about what happened out there. The stories. These archived dispatch calls revealed proof. The audio sat in a plain folder, stamped with a date and a case number that never went anywhere. Years later, those archived dispatch calls finally showed what actually happened that night. Blaine Hargrove was 42, and he produced local radio stories for a small station in the Desert West. On a Monday morning in early spring, he drove to the county building to request old emergency recordings. He had a simple goal for the day. He wanted sound for a cautious piece about misfiled crash reports. The station had heard whispers for years. One incident near a highway turnout kept returning in complaints. The rumor was always the same: a late-night call, a single vehicle, then a sudden silence. Some locals said a teenager vanished. Others said the report was padded to hide a police mistake. Blaine never repeated those claims on air. He only said the file had gaps and missing pages. Dispatch archives were supposed to be routine, so he expected a quick copy and a polite goodbye. At the counter, a clerk named Lark Soria slid a form under the glass and kept her voice low. She looked about 30, and she worked records intake for public requests and internal routing. She told Blaine the recordings existed, but the index notes were strange and partly overwritten. Blaine asked what that meant, and she shrugged, like she did not want the answer either. Lark led him to a side desk with an old computer and a small speaker that crackled at low volume. She said the county had migrated systems twice, and some files survived only as stitched fragments. Blaine thanked her, then put on headphones and began listening with a producer's careful patience. The first minutes sounded normal, a dispatcher logging traffic stops and a stalled truck call. Then the incident started, with a man's voice cutting in, tense, short, and trying to stay calm. He said he was at a turnout by the mile marker sign and something was wrong with a parked car. The dispatcher asked for details, and the caller said the driver was slumped and not responding. Blaine expected the next line: send units, start medical, confirm location. But the recording shifted. A second dispatcher voice appeared, sharper, and it used a call sign Blaine did not recognize. It ordered a unit to break off, then told another unit to hold traffic and wait for a supervisor. The first dispatcher tried to speak, but the audio clipped like someone keyed a mic too close. Blaine rewound and listened again, and the same odd command landed in the same exact second. He paused the audio and stared at the screen, because it sounded like two channels merged poorly. Lark watched him from behind the counter, and her face tightened when she saw his expression. Blaine asked if the second dispatcher was real or if the system had a known echo problem. Lark said there should have been only one dispatcher on nights, and the roster showed a single name. Blaine kept listening, and the caller's voice returned, quieter now, as if he had moved closer. He said the car door was open, and there was a phone on the seat with the screen still lit. The dispatcher told him to step back, and he agreed, but his breathing stayed loud in the mic. Then a new sound came through, a brief metallic click, followed by a calm voice saying, "Cancel units." The cancel order did not sound like a field officer. It sounded like a desk voice with a practiced rhythm. Blaine felt his skin go cold because cancellations were supposed to include a reason and a unit number. Instead, the voice simply said the call was unfounded and told everyone to return to prior assignments. The original dispatcher protested, and the recording ended with a sharp tone and a cut to dead air. Blaine removed the headphones and asked Lark if the logbook matched what he had just heard. She opened a scanned report on her screen, and it showed a routine welfare check with no transport. The notes said the vehicle belonged to an out-of-town contractor, and it drove off before contact. Blaine asked if any unit ever arrived, and Lark said the unit number was blank in the entry. He requested the original dispatch log, and Lark told him those paper logs were stored off-site in boxes. She offered to file another request, and Blaine agreed, keeping his voice steady and professional. As he signed the form, he noticed her hands were trembling, like she had heard this story too. Lark said she could not access everything, but she could tell him where the boxes were indexed. That afternoon, Blaine returned to his station office and transferred the audio into editing software. He did not change the file, he only made a working copy and marked the timestamps carefully. He listened in full, then compared it to the written entry line by line, looking for simple explanations. A bad merge could explain overlap, but it could not explain the new dispatcher voice using a missing call sign. Blaine called a retired dispatcher he knew, a man named Hollis Gant, who taught radio basics at a community college. Hollis was 61, and he had worked nights for 2 decades before taking early retirement. Blaine played a short excerpt, and Hollis immediately asked where the second voice came from. He said it sounded like a console mic, not a portable radio, because of the clean compression and lack of wind noise. Blaine asked about the click, and Hollis said it sounded like a channel patch being opened and closed. He explained that old systems let supervisors override traffic, especially during officer safety incidents. Blaine asked if overrides were logged, and Hollis said they should be, unless someone bypassed the normal menu. He also said the voice cadence felt familiar, like someone who had trained others and used set phrases. Blaine made a plan that was simple: gather every source that could confirm who spoke and who listened. He requested the off-site paper logs, the unit assignment roster, and the maintenance notes for the dispatch console. He also tracked down the original caller using the case number tied to the partial record index. The contact address was outdated, but a utility record pointed to a forwarding box in a coastal town. A week later, Blaine reached the caller by phone, and the man sounded older than expected. His name was Keir Lamb. He was 50, and he worked as a forklift mechanic for a shipping yard. Keir said he had avoided interviews for years because he felt stupid and scared about that night. He agreed to talk off the record first, as long as Blaine did not use his name on air. Keir said he had been driving home late, and he pulled into the turnout to make a quick call. He noticed a sedan with its driver door open, and a person inside who did not respond. He called emergency services from a flip phone, and he remembered the dispatcher voice clearly. He also remembered someone else talking over her, like a second person in the same room. Keir said he heard the cancel order, and it did not come through the phone speaker. He said it came from behind him, like someone standing near the turnout speaking into a handheld radio. Blaine asked if Keir saw anyone, and Keir said he saw a dark SUV with no light bar. It rolled in slow, stopped without headlights, and someone stepped out and told him to leave. Keir said the person was not in uniform, but he held a radio and spoke like he belonged there. He told Keir, "Go home. You didn't see anything, and you don't want trouble." Keir left because he believed him, and because his phone screen had gone dark as if the call dropped. He drove straight home, and he did not sleep, because he kept imagining the open car door in the wind. Blaine asked why Keir never filed a complaint, and Keir said he tried once, then got warned again. He said a man called his house the next day and knew details that were not in the public record. The man told him the county had it handled and said his job could get complicated if he kept talking. Keir said he had a kid at home then, and he chose silence, even though it still bothered him. Blaine compared Keir's memory to the audio again, and one detail stood out in a new way. The cancel voice sounded like it came through the dispatch system, but Keir remembered hearing it nearby. That meant someone on scene repeated the cancel order, or someone on scene caused it to happen. Blaine needed more than a feeling. He needed a solid chain from the console to the turnout. When the off-site boxes arrived, Lark called Blaine and told him to come in after lunch. She met him with a cart of binders and a warning. The pages smelled like smoke and old tape. Blaine thanked her, then began photographing entries with his phone, keeping the dates aligned. The log for that night included the initial call, but the next lines were torn out cleanly. The tier was too neat for age, like someone removed a strip on purpose and then filed the rest. Blaine asked Lark who handled archives back then, and she said a supervisor managed retention compliance. She gave Blaine a name that was public in old payroll records, a dispatch supervisor known for strict control. Blaine did not repeat the name in his notes. He wrote only supervisor and the year. Blaine requested the maintenance notes next, hoping they would show a console override or a repair ticket. The county replied with a short letter saying no relevant notes existed due to a purge policy. Blaine appealed the response and included dates and system model references from public purchasing records. 2 days later, a different clerk emailed a scan that had been missed, a single page with a service code. The page referenced a patch panel fault, and it listed a time within minutes of the turnout call. It also listed a technician sign-off, and the signature matched the supervisor's initials in the payroll files. Blaine showed the page to Hollis, and Hollis frowned and said that was not a technician's signature. He said it looked like a supervisor signing to close a ticket without an actual repair. Blaine now had 3 things that aligned: an overwritten index, torn log lines, and an odd console patch record. Still, none of it proved who issued the cancel order, and none of it proved why. He needed the one thing most people ignored: the background noise that rides under speech. So he took the working copy and asked an audio engineer at the station to run a clean analysis. The engineer, a woman named Tamsin Rowe, was 35 and had built her career restoring old interview tape. She listened with good headphones, then zoomed into the waveform around the metallic click. She said there was a second click under the first, offset by a fraction of a second. She explained it sounded like a desk foot switch, followed by a handheld transmit button. Tamsin also noticed something stranger: a low tone under the cancel voice that stayed constant. She said it sounded like an air conditioner fan, the kind found in small office rooms. Then, she compared it to the first dispatcher voice, and the fan tone was different and steadier. That suggested the cancel voice was recorded in a different room, then patched into the main channel. Blaine asked if that could happen, and Tamsin said yes, if someone used a training room console. Some centers had a second console for drills, and it could be patched into live traffic in emergencies. Blaine asked who had access, and Tamsin said supervisors and trainers usually had the keys. Blaine felt the story tightening because a trainer would know exactly how to sound calm on a bad night. He returned to the county building and asked Lark one careful question. Did the dispatch center have a training console then? Lark hesitated, then said the old floor plan showed a side room labeled instruction booth. She said it was removed during renovations, but it existed in that era and shared wiring with the main floor. Blaine asked if the booth had its own mic, and she said yes, and it had a direct patch switch. Blaine still did not have the motive, and he did not want to guess at it. So he looked at what else happened that night, and he found something buried in unrelated paperwork. A property sheet showed a large cash seizure from a traffic stop logged into the evidence room at midnight. The next morning, the cash was reported short, and the report blamed a counting error and got closed. Blaine lined up the times, and the turnout call landed right between the evidence log and the cash discrepancy report. He asked Hollis if a fake emergency could pull units off the road, and Hollis said it was a classic trick. A welfare check at a turnout would draw patrol, and it would also distract dispatch from monitoring internal doors. If someone needed 5 minutes alone, a sudden call and a sudden cancel could make that window. Blaine called Keir again and asked about the dark SUV, and Keir described it in more detail. He said it had a State Fleet plate and a small antenna cluster like a communications vehicle. He said the driver who spoke to him wore a plain jacket, but carried himself like a supervisor. Keir also said the sedan in the turnout was not in bad shape. It looked staged, like it had been parked carefully. Blaine realized the proof was not just in what the dispatch calls said, it was in what they avoided saying. No one ever confirmed a unit arrival, no one ever logged a plate check, and no one asked for medical priority. The call was designed to be started and stopped quickly, without the normal steps that create paper trails. That meant the person controlling it knew policy and knew exactly which parts to skip. Blaine requested one more thing: the building entry logs for the dispatch center on that night. The county said those logs did not exist anymore, but a facilities contractor had kept backups for billing disputes. After more calls, Blaine obtained a scanned badge report that showed door activity after midnight. It showed the supervisor badge opening the training booth door, then the evidence room hallway door minutes later. Blaine sat with Tamsin and Hollis and listened to the key moments again, with the badge report in hand. They played the click, the cancel voice, and the sharp cut to dead air. Hollis said the cut sounded like a manual stop, not a system end, because the tail tone was missing. Tamsin said the handheld click matched a portable radio nearby, which fit Keir hearing a voice behind him. Blaine had to be careful, because proof can still be misunderstood if the story gets rushed. He wrote a timeline using only documents, audio artifacts, and witness statements that could be verified. He removed names, and he removed any detail that could point to private people who had done nothing wrong. He focused on the method: a staged call, a training booth patch, a rapid cancel, and a missing log strip. When Blaine returned to the county building to ask for comment, Lark met him with tired eyes. She said someone had called her office, asking why she kept helping a radio producer dig up old dirt. Blaine told her she did not need to do anything else, and he could handle the rest on his own. Lark shook her head and said she had one more thing, because she was done pretending it was normal. She handed him a photocopy of an internal memo, filed as a training note but written like a warning. It instructed staff to route certain audio requests to supervision, and it referenced the turnout call by date. The memo used the phrase proof risk, and it ordered that no copies be made outside official review. Lark said she found it in a misfiled binder, and it had never been scanned into the public index. Blaine read the memo twice, then folded it and placed it in a plain envelope with his notes. The proof was not a confession, but it was a paper trail showing someone feared what the audio contained. He thanked Lark, and she asked one question. "Are you going to put this out there?" Blaine said he would, but he would do it carefully and only with what he could support. The final piece came from a place Blaine did not expect: a voicemail from an old number he had called weeks earlier. It was short and strained, and it sounded like a person trying to choose words that would not invite retaliation. The voice said the training booth patch switch was used that night, and it was used by someone with keys. The voice also said the sedan at the turnout belonged to a county pool, and it was checked out under a fake entry. Blaine saved the voicemail, then asked Tamsin to confirm it was not spliced or altered. Tamsin said it was clean, and she noted the same steady fan tone found under the cancel voice. That meant the voicemail speaker had likely been in the same small room and knew the sound of it. Blaine did not know who left the message, but the audio carried its own quiet fingerprint. When the story aired, Blaine kept the language careful and grounded because facts matter more than heat. He played the dispatch excerpt, then explained the torn log, the badge report, and the patch record. He included Keir's account without naming him, and he described the SUV in broad terms only. He never claimed a specific person stole anything, but he showed how the staged call created a perfect distraction. The county responded with a short statement, saying the matter was old and could not be confirmed. They did not deny the training booth existed, and they did not explain why the log strip was missing. Within days, a state auditor announced a review of evidence handling practices going back many years. Blaine did not celebrate, because the point was never drama. It was the shape of truth in the record. Weeks later, Blaine sat in his edit room and listened to the archived call one last time. He noticed how the original dispatcher sounded, like someone trying to do her job inside a sudden fog. He imagined the moment she realized a second voice had taken control, and she could not stop it. It was not supernatural. It was ordinary power, used quietly, and that made it worse. Blaine filed the raw audio, the memo copy, and his notes into the station archive with strict access rules. He labeled everything with dates in words, so future staff would not lose the trail in bad metadata. He also sent Keir a short message through the number he had, saying the story was finally out. Keir replied once, and only with relief, saying he could breathe easier now. The proof had been there all along, hiding in a click, a fan hum, and a missing strip of paper. It did not solve every question about the turnout, but it showed the call was never what it claimed. For Blaine, that was enough to matter, because it meant the record could still be corrected. And for anyone who still trusted the archive, it was a reminder that silence sometimes has fingerprints.